The first thing you need to understand is that some knowledge isn't meant for the faint of heart. On a humid night in September 1847, 12 miles south of Charleston, South Carolina, the world shifted for the Grantham family, though no one outside that plantation would ever fully know how. 7 bodies, laid out in beds like a perverse ritual, throats opened with surgical precision, and not a single soul in the town dared speak freely of it afterward. The missing piece of the puzzle was a young man named Samuel, bought not for labor, not for loyalty, but because his body fascinated, unsettled, and invoked obsession. Skin as white as porcelain, eyes pink like rose quartz, hair the color of corn silk in late summer. He was a living anomaly, a curiosity, a secret some men would kill to possess and some would kill to suppress. Thaddeus Grantham didn't just purchase Samuel. He acquired a living mirror that reflected everything hidden inside men who believed themselves civilized. 3 years before the massacre, Samuel arrived at the plantation, silent, measured, aware of every gaze and whisper. He learned quickly that education was dangerous when housed in a body that unnerved the powerful, that the curiosity of the rich often twisted into obsession, and that the line between owner and subject could be blurred if you understood patience and timing. Every step Samuel took was observed, recorded, dissected not with knives, but with the cold scrutiny of a mind that sought dominion over nature itself. The Grantham house was more than a home, it was a theater of control, a laboratory of social and psychological power. Portraits of ancestors watched from gilded frames. Crystal chandeliers reflected wealth and status back into the eyes of those who served beneath them. And in this cathedral of supremacy, Samuel existed like a ghost, a specimen, quietly absorbing every detail. Servant stairways, hidden entrances, the precise schedule of meals, the positions of keys and locks. Every observation was a note in a symphony of strategy, played out while the family carried on their rituals, unaware that the seed of something far older, far colder, had been planted in their midst. What you must grasp, and what most never dare admit, is that the human mind, when pressed by desperation, obsession, or fear, can craft horrors more calculated than brute violence. Samuel understood this. He had seen how curiosity blinded men, how it made them predictable, and how, in the perfect silence of night, the unseen hand can alter destiny. What happened on that night in September was not random, not impulsive. It was the culmination of years of observation, manipulation, and the patient waiting of a mind that had long understood the patterns of power. Tonight, I want you to step closer, because this is where the story stops being folklore and becomes a study of control, of hidden agendas, and of a darkness that doesn't shout, it whispers. And in those whispers, you'll begin to see the truth. The most dangerous people are not those who strike with fury, but those who wait. They watch, they calculate, and when the world sleeps, they act. Do you feel it? That first prickle in your spine? That is the rabbit hole opening. Step carefully. 3 years earlier, in the spring of 1844, Thaddeus Grantham walked into a Charleston slave market with a mind sharpened by obsession. He was not there to buy labor, his fields were already profitable, his overseers competent, but to acquire something rare, something that elevated him above the ordinary men of his class. And that's when Samuel appeared, sitting apart from the crowd, his pale skin glowing even in the dim light, his pink eyes fixed somewhere beyond the eyes that studied him. The traders didn't understand him. Planters whispered uneasily, exchanging glances as if the boy's existence alone had broken a natural law. But Thaddeus recognized him immediately, not as a person, not yet, but as a specimen, a puzzle, an opportunity to demonstrate mastery over life itself. $800, the trader said, naming a price that made even the shrewd Edmund Rutledge, Thaddeus's factor, flinch. But Thaddeus had already calculated value in a currency beyond coin. Power, influence, dominion. Samuel's uniqueness was the perfect instrument for a man who measured worth in control. When he circled the young man, observing the way he moved, the tilt of his head, the calm neutrality of his voice, Thaddeus felt a thrill reserved for hunters and collectors alike. This was not about wealth or labor, it was about possession, about bending the extraordinary to the will of the ordinary, about proving that curiosity could be transformed into authority. From that day, Samuel's life at Grantham Plantation existed in the shadowed space between subjugation and observation. He was neither free nor fully enslaved, but a participant in a silent game whose rules he alone would learn. Thaddeus cataloged him relentlessly: measurements, tests of light tolerance, daily examinations. Guests at dinner parties were drawn into his presence, instructed to regard him as a specimen, to marvel at his peculiarity, while Samuel silently absorbed the layout of the house, the rhythms of the family, the weaknesses hidden behind every smile. Every gesture, every glance, every lapse of attention became a data point. He learned the timing of footsteps on creaking stairs, the cadence of servants' routines, and the position of the plantation keys. Yet the children Margaret, Thomas Jr., and Catherine reacted differently. Margaret saw him with a mixture of fascination and fear. Thomas Jr. tested him, probing for authority over someone who defied ordinary expectations. Only little Catherine approached without fear, offering books and curiosity instead of suspicion. Through her, Samuel learned the architecture of the house, the hidden corridors, and, most importantly, the routines of those who believed themselves in control. It was in these quiet, deliberate observations that the first seed of strategy took root. Samuel understood the mechanics of power because he had been forced to see it through the lens of survival. Obsession, curiosity, and the fragile arrogance of men who believed themselves masters, these became tools he could exploit. The boy who had been bought as a living anomaly was quietly turning knowledge into weaponry, patience into leverage. And while the Granthams slept, unaware of the danger within their own walls, he measured and memorized, preparing for a night that would not come in haste, but in cold, calculated precision. Time at Grantham Plantation was measured not in days or months, but in the silent accumulation of knowledge. Samuel became a shadow within the house, invisible yet omnipresent, a presence that people ignored at their peril. He learned who spoke when they were afraid, who smiled to conceal weakness, and who believed themselves untouchable because of wealth or lineage. The masters thought themselves architects of the world. In reality, they were merely pieces on a board they had no comprehension of. Every movement, every gesture, every whispered command was catalogued with precision. Samuel understood human behavior in a way that could make the most arrogant man tremble, and he waited. The Grantham family remained oblivious, absorbed in their routines and curiosities. Thaddeus continued his experiments, measuring, recording, categorizing Samuel as though he were a rare specimen on display. Margaret observed him from the corners of rooms, a mixture of fear and fascination knitting her thoughts. Thomas Jr. sought to assert dominance over someone who defied his expectations, testing limits that did not exist in the boy's compliance. Only little Catherine approached without caution, offering friendship and books, providing Samuel with access to the patterns of the household that no adult could anticipate. Through her, he learned the hidden passages, the stairways that connected servants' quarters to the main floors, the timing of footsteps, the locks that controlled access to rooms and secrets. Every detail would matter when the time came. Patience became Samuel's ally. He had survived 4 owners before Thaddeus, each drawn to his unusual appearance, each blind to the mind observing them. He had learned that knowledge is power, that fear can be manipulated, and that those who think themselves in control often leave gaps, small openings where destiny can be rewritten. He experimented in silence, testing reactions, noting patterns, marking the weaknesses that only the patient could see. The boy who arrived as a curiosity was now something far more dangerous. A strategist, an invisible predator in a house of untested arrogance. In the evenings, when the plantation fell silent and the gaslights flickered, Samuel moved through the shadows, cataloging, memorizing, preparing. He studied the family's habits with the care of a surgeon dissecting a body, learning the sequence of locks, the schedules of meals, and the vulnerabilities of human psychology. Every dinner, every discussion, every distracted glance became part of a vast ledger in his mind. The arrogance of men blinded them to the threat beneath their own roof, and the beauty of it, the cruel perfection of it, was that he would strike when no one suspected, and when the world assumed he could do nothing but wait. Here is where the story diverges from what is told in polite society. The narrative of a boy who snapped is false. The massacre that followed was not the act of rage, but the product of calculation, of anticipation, of a mind honed by years of observation and silent preparation. Samuel was no mere curiosity. He was a master of timing, patience, and human error. And it is in this transformation from observed to observer, from specimen to strategist, that the true darkness begins. The night that would mark the end of the Grantham family's illusion of control arrived not with fanfare, but with the quiet inevitability of a storm no one saw coming. September 14, 1847, was like any other southern evening, humid air pressing against the skin, Spanish moss swaying in the shadows outside the white columns, the candlelight flickering in the windows as if nervous about what it illuminated. Inside, the family carried on their routines, oblivious to the patterns that had been studied, the vulnerabilities mapped, and the weakness catalogued. Samuel moved through the house as he always had, but this time with the knowledge that patience had reached its limit, that the hours and years of observation had converged into a single, precise moment of power. He understood instinctively that terror is most effective when it is silent, when it creeps into consciousness before the body realizes it is in danger. The children were asleep, the parents in their chamber, the servants scattered and unaware. Samuel's actions were deliberate, each movement calculated with the precision of the very measurements that had once confined him. He did not strike blindly. He executed a choreography that mirrored the cold, clinical scrutiny he had endured at the hands of his owner. Every door unlatched, every lock bypassed, every step taken in near silence was part of a design perfected over years of watching. The slaughter itself was executed with surgical exactitude. Throats opened, beds emptied, and the echoes of inevitability resonated through the house while the night itself remained indifferent. Samuel had learned more than survival. He had mastered the understanding of fear, of dominance, of the fragile egos that masquerade as authority. He had observed how men measure their own worth by the subjugation of others and understood that the undoing of that ego requires neither noise nor chaos, only precision. The Granthams were not murdered in rage, they were dismantled, systematically, as one might remove the pieces of a clock to understand its inner workings. Outside the plantation, the world continued, ignorant of the upheaval within the walls. Rumors spread slowly, cautiously, in whispers among the enslaved, a language of shadows and warnings that would persist for generations. The official story drowning in the Ashley River was a lie, convenient, neat, designed to close the door on questions that threaten the comfort of those who profit from obedience. But the truth, preserved in whispered histories, is darker, more calculated, and far more instructive. It reveals how one mind, underestimated and confined, can overturn entire hierarchies when patience meets intelligence. By the next morning, the house bore the quiet horror of its own dismantling. Samuel was gone, as silent as he had always been, leaving behind the echoes of control inverted. He had demonstrated something essential about power. It does not reside in wealth, in birthright, or in brute strength. It resides in understanding, in anticipation, in the manipulation of expectation. And now, this knowledge, forbidden and terrifying, is the same knowledge I am offering you. Remember, the most dangerous force is not the one that strikes first, but the one that observes, waits, and knows exactly when to act. If you understand this, type Shadow Knows twice in the comments. Let it mark your presence, your awareness, and your readiness to descend further into the truths that others fear to acknowledge. What followed the night of the Grantham deaths was a study in the power of silence and the manipulation of perception. The official record was a clean, clinical lie. Samuel drowned, an accident, nothing more. But those who whispered in the shadows, the enslaved who had long understood the cruelty and unpredictability of the world they were forced to serve, knew the truth. They spoke of precision, patience, and the cold calculation of a mind that had learned every weakness in a household and exploited it without hesitation. History, as recorded by those with wealth and influence, always favors the comfortable. What is suppressed, forgotten, or erased holds lessons far more dangerous for those willing to see them. In the months and years that followed, Other plantations reported anomalies, document thefts, forged papers, valuables taken while families slept. Samuel became a specter, a symbol of unseen intelligence capable of undermining systems thought immutable. These incidents were never connected publicly, yet patterns existed for anyone patient enough to notice. The powerful, those who trusted in routine and obedience, are never as secure as they believe. Observation and understanding of weaknesses, whether in people, institutions, or systems, grant power greater than any sword or whip. Samuel's actions were not just revenge or survival. They were a demonstration of principles most men never consider, lessons hidden in plain sight. The erasure of the Grantham massacre from public discourse is itself a story of control. Powerful men suppressed the newspapers, silenced voices, and ensured that the narrative served the illusion of order. Fear of embarrassment, fear of chaos, and fear of the unknown all converge to maintain the dominance of those who profit from ignorance. Samuel's knowledge became a threat precisely because it undermined the framework of unquestioned authority. Those who observe, calculate, and anticipate will always have an advantage over those who act on impulse or arrogance. The lesson is simple yet terrifying. The world is never fair, and history is never complete. It is curated by those in power, and the truths that unsettle them are buried beneath layers of lies and omission. And yet, Samuel's story is not just a warning, it is a guide. It shows how mastery begins with observation, how patience sharpens intelligence, and how subtlety can dismantle systems stronger than armies. Every man in that house, every master and overseer, was undone not because he was weaker in muscle but weaker in perception. Every misstep, every blind spot, every lapse in awareness was noted and transformed into leverage. The power of the unseen is absolute because it allows one to act before others even understand they are at risk. Now, I want you to feel the weight of this. The stories you are told, the narratives that shape your understanding of control and history, are often curated to keep you compliant, obedient, and predictable. Recognize the system. Study the gaps. Observe. If you are ready to mark this knowledge as your own, type "shadow knows" twice again. Let the ritual of acknowledgement anchor your awareness, because we are only halfway down the rabbit hole. What Samuel mastered in those quiet years at Grantham Plantation was not merely the physical architecture of a house or the routines of its inhabitants, it was the psychology of dominance itself. Every gesture, every expectation, every assumption became data. He understood that control is never purely external. It lives in the minds of those who believe themselves in charge. The illusion of authority is fragile. It is constructed from habits, pride, and the assumption that the world bends to wealth or tradition. When those assumptions are examined, catalogued, and manipulated, even the strongest hierarchies collapse like sandcastles under a tide they never saw coming. The lesson hidden in Samuel's patient preparation is the same lesson the powerful have known for centuries. Information is the ultimate currency. Observing patterns, understanding motivations, exploiting weaknesses, these are the tools that decide outcomes long before action is taken. Thaddeus Grantham thought he was the master, the observer, the collector. But Samuel inverted the dynamic, turning every curiosity, every obsession, every flaw into leverage. He proved that power is most potent when invisible, when patience has sharpened perception into a weapon. One does not need to confront an opponent directly. One needs only to understand him completely and to wait for the perfect alignment of opportunity and timing. Institutions function the same way. Governments, corporations, families, organizations all rely on assumptions, rituals, and the inertia of compliance. Their strength is illusionary. Those who can see the underlying patterns, predict reactions, and exploit the blind spots hold a quiet authority far greater than that which is advertised in public. Samuel was, in essence, a living blueprint of this principle. Every calculated observation, every memorized routine, every psychological insight he gathered became a map of influence that allowed him to rewrite the rules without anyone realizing the game had changed. Even more chilling is how human nature facilitates its own undoing. People reveal their fears in private, their biases in casual gestures, their weaknesses in the routines they assume are invisible. Samuel read these signals like a code. And once understood, the collapse becomes inevitable. The same mechanisms operate in every system of power, though rarely with the stark clarity Samuel employed. Observation, patience, and the courage to act at the precise moment, these are the keys to mastery over men, over institutions, over destiny itself. This is why his story resonates across generations. It is a lesson about hidden forces and calculated strategy, about patience as a weapon, and about the danger of underestimating the unseen. The night of slaughter was not chaos, it was inevitability. And the patterns Samuel exploited exist everywhere, in every structure of control you encounter. If you are prepared to see them, to recognize where unseen hands manipulate outcomes, you begin the first stage of your own transformation. Pause for a moment. If you are following closely, if you feel the shift in understanding, type shadow knows twice in the comments. Anchor yourself to this awareness, because what comes next will confront the hidden machinery of human obsession, greed, and corruption at its most intimate and terrifying level. Thaddeus Grantham's obsession with Samuel was not mere curiosity, it was a reflection of a deeper pathology that afflicts those who seek to dominate life itself. He believed that possession equaled mastery, that controlling the extraordinary could elevate him above ordinary men. But obsession is a double-edged blade. The sharper it is, the more likely it is to cut the hand that wields it. Thaddeus saw Samuel as a specimen, a subject for study, a demonstration of intellect and superiority, but he never recognized that in doing so, he had invited a mind sharper than his own into the very heart of his power. He failed to perceive that intelligence paired with patience can outmatch wealth, brute force, and status every time. The Grantham household, with its crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, and meticulously curated collections, became a theater of arrogance and control, and yet within it, Samuel operated like a ghost in a machine. Every pattern of obsession, every ritualized test, every display of scientific curiosity was observed, stored, and transformed into insight. He watched how Thaddeus measured his own importance, how his pride blinded him, how he underestimated those he considered beneath him. Power, Samuel learned, is never absolute, it is a construct maintained only by the complacency and ignorance of others. When those assumptions are broken, the house of mastery collapses. And it did collapse in the most clinical, precise way imaginable. Samuel's patience was a tool, his observation a weapon, his silence a strategy. He did not need rage, he did not need chaos, he needed only to act in accordance with the knowledge he had accumulated, to exploit the vulnerabilities that had always been there, hidden behind arrogance and routine. The Grantham children, the servants, the master himself, none were prepared for the inevitability of a mind that had spent years learning every nuance of their behavior. The massacre was the culmination of lessons most men refused to study. Control is never guaranteed, authority is a fragile illusion, and curiosity unchecked can become obsession that blinds even the most disciplined. The lesson extends beyond that one house, one night. Samuel's story is a mirror, reflecting the dangerous arrogance of those who believe mastery comes from outward displays. Wealth, position, influence. True control resides in understanding the unseen forces, in reading the patterns, in knowing when to act and when to wait. Thaddeus thought he was the teacher, the observer, but Samuel had been quietly instructing him in the most terrifying of all subjects. That knowledge without humility and obsession without foresight is a vulnerability to be exploited. And now, as you absorb this, recognize the broader truth. Power is never what it seems. People, institutions, and systems all have blind spots, predictable weaknesses, and patterns that reward the patient and punish the arrogant. Samuel's method, observation, memorization, strategic patience, reveals a principle that transcends time. To understand is to control. To wait is to dominate. To strike at the precise moment is to rewrite history. By the time dawn crept across the low-country horizon, the world had quietly shifted. The Grantham estate, once a monument to wealth, obsession, and the illusion of control, had become a testament to the power of calculated patience and hidden intelligence. Samuel was gone, leaving behind only silence, absence, and the echoes of inevitability. No force could trace him, No authority could reconstruct the precise choreography of that night. He had acted not out of rage, but out of comprehension, understanding the mechanics of human arrogance, exploiting the predictable fragility of power, and demonstrating that true mastery lies not in dominance displayed, but in subtlety executed with precision. Consider what this reveals about the structures around you. Power, authority, and influence often appear invincible because they are performed so confidently. But their foundations are habits, assumptions, and blind faith in order. Samuel dismantled a family's hierarchy with nothing but observation, timing, and a mind attuned to the weaknesses that no one else cared to notice. Every lock bypassed, every routine memorized, every lapse of arrogance exploited was a lesson in the quiet mechanics of control. This is the kind of knowledge most men never see, because it requires patience, attention, and the willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about human vulnerability. Even more disturbing is the implication. These patterns exist everywhere. Organizations, governments, families, and social hierarchies all operate on the same fragile principles. Those who master observation, those who understand the psychology behind routines and rituals, can navigate and manipulate systems invisible to the casual eye. Samuel's story is a blueprint, a warning, and a guide. It teaches that domination does not require violence. It requires comprehension, timing, and the audacity to act when the world assumes inertia will protect it. What Samuel left behind is not merely a memory, it is a philosophy of quiet power. The world continues to reward those who are visible, aggressive, and performative, while ignoring the patient strategist in the shadows. And yet, the true architect of fate is the one who waits, who observes, and who strikes when inevitability aligns with opportunity. This is why the whispers persisted for decades among those who knew the truth. Fear is a weapon, knowledge is currency, and patience is a force more terrifying than any sword. Remember this: the most dangerous force in any system is the mind that knows how it works. Samuel's lesson is not myth, not legend, it is a principle that applies to men who wish to understand control, influence, and the subtle mechanics of power. If you have followed this far, if you feel the shift in understanding, you must acknowledge it. Type Shadow Knows twice in the comments. Let it anchor you to this awareness. Your perception has changed. You have descended into knowledge that cannot be unseen. And from here, every system, every hierarchy, every display of power you encounter will be seen differently through the lens of patience, observation, and quiet mastery. Step into the shadows of history where curiosity turns deadly. Watch carefully, comment Shadow Knows twice to mark your awareness, and subscribe to uncover more forbidden truths hidden in plain sight. Are you ready to see what others refuse to acknowledge?